45 minutes times 4 or 5 interviews. So it's based on limited info. Okay, I will stop. Yeah. Any questions at this point about the process? Yes. Yeah, yes. So the question was, when you do a technical interview, does that mean that it's about your programming, right? So yes, a technical interview is literally, it's this. So it's 10 minutes about sort of yourself. So if I was interviewing you, I would ask about your previous experience. Then it's about half an hour of a technical question. So I'll go into an example later, but it might be like reverse a string or something, or I don't know, add like implement a reverse a linked list, something like that. So you do some coding. And finally, the last 5 minutes at the end would be for any questions that you have for me about the company, about what I work on.
Do you consider more programs better for everybody?
I'm sorry?
When you consider more programs is better for everybody?
So usually, do you mean during the interview? We usually just ask one question. Is that what you're asking? Or okay, I'll ask it again. We'll ask it again. Remember your question. Ask it. Yeah.
So it's 5 interviews over the course of a day. So it's like 5 hours.
Yeah. It's about usually they'll feed you. So yeah, about 4 or 5 hours. Yeah.
So the person who conducts the interview takes the whole day just to interview them.
It would be 4 to 5 different people. So yes, you would be there the whole day, and then they would bring different people for each part. Yeah, for each 45-minute part, it would be a different person. Yes.
Would it follow the same process? Would each interview be based on that?
Each interview is basically based on that. Yes.
Is it true that the tutor asks some smart question like how many elephants you can put in a bar?
That's true.
Yes. So the question was, do companies like Twitter ask these sort of abstract questions, like how many? A classic one is like, why are I don't know, manhole cover? Like for the sewers in the street? Yeah. What is it? So why are they round instead of square? That's a classic. So no, generally speaking, companies don't use those types of questions anymore because they're not good questions, right? They don't actually test your skills on the job. So no, the answer is no, they don't. Yeah. Maybe some companies do.
I think for technical interviews for engineers, they don't really ask this type of questions. Some companies might still do. When you think about it, like interviews back then is not just if you're knowledgeable about something or like you're a fit for the role, but they actually want to put pressure on you and make you actually kind of squeamish. They're like scary stories about interviews back then. And another part of it with these questions is that it's more about your thought process. Like the interviewer just wants to know like how you actually think through things and how you actually communicate with the interviewer. So that's why they kind of ask this type of questions that they do.
Yeah, sometimes the other words depend on the humor level. Maybe.
Yeah, I think maybe consulting also might ask.
Yeah, I think consulting still do that.
Programming is not. Cool. So I'm going to go through the interview and then we'll stop for questions again. So broadly speaking, This is what an interviewer would be looking for. Can you code? How do you have domain knowledge? So, for example, if you're going to work for a company that primarily programs in Ruby, do you know Ruby? That's domain knowledge. System design. So, the idea being, okay, we want to implement some website. What are the different components you need to build to implement this whole website? That's a system design kind of question. Problem solving is tied to coding in a way. It's similar to coding, but it's sort of your abstract, your way of reasoning through a problem given to you. And finally, this sort of vague culture fit. This idea that do your values align with the company's values, which is hard to practice for. But the most important part is the coding. So generally speaking, you'll code, on a whiteboard, or maybe pencil and paper, or on a laptop while someone's watching you. Chalkboard if it's like in a school or something. And usually the question will be something like this. Write code that solves some problem. So, so the most important thing that we want to see is the most important thing you can do to increase your chances of success is to have a plan. Okay? So you hear the question, you have a plan. So we'll go through an example. So here might be a question. Write code that takes a list of integers and adds one integer to each value and then returns the new array, right? Or a new list. So the first thing to do is not to just start writing code right away. Okay? Because that's not having a plan. It's sort of just jumping in. So to break down sort of this plan broadly, I'm going to go through each of these. The first thing to do is, we'll go through each of these. But really, something very important for me, who would be let's say the person interviewing, is that you speak out loud. The interviewer needs to know what you're thinking in order to help you, guide you along the way. Not everyone works like this, like talking out loud. It's a little bit hard. So it's also a skill to practice. So the plan here for this question, add one. Clarify and ask questions. So what might be a good clarification for this question? Anyone have any ideas? I say, write code that adds one to every image. Is that specific enough? Do we have other questions?
Add the number one or one.
Yeah, add the number one. Yeah. So we have a list of 3, 7, 2 returns 4, 8, 3.
Maybe you know if you have to add in the same list or another list.
In the same way, sorry?
Maybe what you say, that one list to a list. Maybe you need to know if you need to add this number one to the list, to the same list, to the same bar, or another bar list.
Right. So yes, the idea that are we adding one just on the end of the list, or are we adding one to each number of the list, like that? Yeah.
No,
So
no. My question is, you need to add one to each element and put it in the same bar on the list, or create another bar list and do add get the first element.
Or might I be given a list that has strings or something, right? So you want to make sure you know what you're operating on. Or what about, could I be given an empty list with no elements? What should I do for that? So those are all clarifying. Really important to start on the right foot, because if you start going the wrong direction in the interview, you're eating through your time, and then you run out of time to action. Yes?
Maybe another question, maybe another question.
Yeah.
What do you what do you need it for?
Yeah.
For example, maybe maybe you need to add one, but for example, maybe you forgot that you change the number of the.
They help you go down the right path when you're actually implementing the solution. So then once you have your questions, you say back the problem to the person interviewed. That way, the interviewer knows that you know what you're trying to solve. Then you start working on solutions. This doesn't mean start coding. It means talk through it. So you might say, okay, well, I'm going to take the list first. I'm going to check if it's empty. And then I'm going to check if each element is an integer, and so on. Right? So the idea being, work out a solution, give the interviewer a chance to jump in and say, okay, maybe that's the wrong direction. And that's sort of code. This is probably the most important piece. So you'll write some code. Generally speaking, if you make the code you want to make it as real as possible. So if you're at the whiteboard coding, you want to make sure that it's parentheses are in the right place, the variable names are correct, things like that. You don't want to just kind of make it sloppy. You want to make it precise. Okay. Once you're done coding, you'll run through, and you'll convince yourself and me that your code works. So you say, okay, start here. Then you go through as if you were describing the code. Finally, you want to make sure you catch corner cases. So a corner case for this would be like an empty list, for example, right? Make sure your code doesn't explode if you get an empty list. Another one might be if you're given strings instead of integers. You want to make sure it doesn't mess up. And then finally, towards the end, you want to talk about how long does your code take to run. So if you have a list of 10 integers, does it take 10 steps to finish? Or does it take 100 steps to finish? 1,000 steps to finish? So that's the sort of, the big O notation? Is that what big O? Yeah, a little bit. So it's similar to that. Essentially just describing how efficient your program is. And then finally, again, this is where you get the chance to say, okay, I wrote my code. Here are some ways I can make it better. And then you go through the process again. And you say, okay, it doesn't work for this. So now I want to fix it and go through the whole process. So like I mentioned, the code is the most important part of this piece. Everything else leads you on the right track, but the code is really crucial. Okay. So, sort of to summarize the best practices here. So you want to give people, so you want to try to get as much out as possible. Practice is really important. You think you know, at least for me, I think I know how to program until someone says, okay, go to the whiteboard and start programming, and then I'm like, and you don't know where to start, right? So you want to make sure you're not stuck like that. You want to practice the format. So do it on the whiteboard, do it on your laptop, and also get your friends, your peers to work with you, practicing interviewing. These are very common types of problems. So implement a hash table or dictionary. Any sort of string manipulation. So reverse a string, compare two strings to see how equal they are. Things like that. Bitwise operators. So and or, So basically like represent, like, turn an integer, like turn a 9, into the binary version of 9. So 1, 1, 1, no. 1, 1, no. 1, 0, 0, 1. Yeah. 1001, right? So turn the integer into the binary. Any types of tree questions, so the greatest common ancestor, or confirm that a binary tree is a binary search tree, and any type of stack or tree questions also. These are all very common types. Okay, so before the questions up to here. Is this type of interview occur at all levels, or is it more for junior or more for senior types of people? I would say that the more junior you are, the more likely you are to run into these types of problems. Really testing fundamentals of programming. If you're looking for a more senior role, they usually step back a bit and ask about system design and your ability to architect a large application, and less about like the details. But you still might get something like this. Other question? Yes.
I don't know if you saw this, but how are the interviews for non-technical roles?
How are the interviews for non-technical roles? It really depends on what the role is. So the only other interview I have experience with is a sort of like a program manager role, or like a product manager role. So basically, we might ask different types of questions, not like coding questions. I can get more specific later if you want. We can chat about it after. But yeah. Yes.
Do you do these interviews remotely?
Do we do interviews remotely? Yes, it depends. So if the candidate is far away, then we might do a few interviews over Skype or video chat, and then after doing a few of those, we might fly in the candidate for it on person, on site. Yeah. Yes.
Can I say a question regarding data structure?
Are data structure questions more frequent than algorithm questions?
No, both. Both are not more important.
I think data structures and algorithms are probably the two most common types of questions. So if you feel comfortable with hash tables, reversing lists, things like that, that's really a good place to start. Because many questions are built on top of that. Right? So maybe it's not directly like how do you reverse a linked list, but it might be okay. Look at two linked lists and see if one is the reverse of the other. Yeah. No? Yeah. Yes.
Before you even consider someone for this test, what will be what you consider most important? Like what background is more important? Maybe a certificate, maybe a previous career, maybe the job that you have previously done.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what's sort of question is like, what is most important with your sort of background or previous experience, work experience? I'll get a little bit about that, and then I think Judy can also answer that. We can do it at the end. Once you get to the interview, all we care about is how well you did in the interview. Part of the interview, as I mentioned before, is this. So that 10 minutes about you is your background, and that's part of this interview. I would say it's a more minor part, and the coding 30 minutes is the most important. That being said, before getting to the interview, your resume, there are different things, obviously, that are important, which I think Judy, we can go into at the end. Yeah? Anything else? We're almost done. Okay. So Okay, I'll go through just like two more brief examples. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but we can talk about it after if you like, just to get a sense of some questions. So one might be count occurrences of a, so let's say you have a long string, and then you have a shorter string. How many times does the short string appear in the long string? So, I don't know what so like, okay, so like, if this is your string, your long string, count occurrences, how many times does O appear in this string? So that'd be 1, 2, right? Or how many times does CO appear in the string? And that would be just once. Yeah. Okay, but it's something like that. Or another one might be our two strings. Okay. Do you know anagrams? Anagrams are like you have some words on your job. Most of the time, what you're doing is explaining what you're doing to others. Yes. And so that's a really crucial skill. So this is something maybe I wrote up. The candidate understood the question, didn't get it right, but they were on the right track. They had a good thought process. They were very thorough. They were enthusiastic about what our company does. You know, that last 5 minutes of questions at the end of the interview, they were enthusiastic about that. And they were eager to learn. They wanted to, continue to grow at the company. Yes. Do we give feedback back to the interviewee? Generally not, unfortunately. Yes, please. You can sometimes, depending on the size of the company, it's worth emailing back to the recruiter and saying, hey, thank you for your time. I'm curious how I can improve in the future. Smaller companies may be able to accommodate you better. Larger companies will probably.
There's a reason for that, from what I sort of know.
Yeah.
But there's actually just some companies are just more worried, especially the bigger they are. They're more concerned about legal repercussions when they provide feedback, just in case it violates like certain EOC, equal opportunity guidelines.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. Process. Okay, so that's a good question. Yeah. And then that would be a strong pack. Maybe I put an 8 or a 9 on the scale. So to wrap up, interviews, be prepared to write code. We're definitely going to write code. Go in ready to write code. Have a good attitude. Again, we want to know if you're good to work with, if you're a good teammate. Know what you're interviewing for. Don't come to Twitter saying you want to work at Facebook or whatever. Right? Know what you're interviewing for. And really, we're interviewing you, and we're also interviewing for future you, right? We want to know what your trajectory at a company is going to be. So be flexible. Tell them you want to learn, and you're ready to work on whatever. A question that's often asked is, why do you want to work here? So make sure you have a good answer to that. That's something you can prepare in advance. There's no reason to lose points on this. This is, if possible, understand what they're working with. So if they're a Ruby, if they're a company that uses Ruby, then know that so that you have something to talk about. It's not always possible, but it shows initiative. And also, you're going to be doing, you're going to do this a lot because you're going to have multiple interviews, and they're all going to ask the same questions or similar questions. So it's going to feel silly to you, but remember that these interviews they don't talk to each other, so they don't know you already answered this question. So even though it feels silly to say the same thing again and again, just be ready. Then multiple interviews, and try to have a good time. Again, that makes it better for the interviewer, makes it better for you, which ideally makes it better as well. And then, Yes.
Or mostly engineering at Twitter. Your question about hiring Latin Americans in the US. So it all depends on the companies. Usually bigger companies are more willing to sponsor foreign nationals because to pretty much work in the US, you do need you need a work visa. And for engineers, usually it's on H-1B. Is anyone aware of what H-1B is? Yeah. So, so the H-1B is mostly for engineers, and I believe each year there's a quota of 80,000 visas specifically for foreign nationals, and I believe 60,000 is actually for people with bachelor degrees, and 20,000 is for masters and up. So the higher education that you have with master's graduate programs, then you'll probably have a higher chance than if you were just to have a bachelor degree. And that is also specifically for engineering. So they are looking for people with an engineering background in computer science, computer engineering, or something in that area, because basically in the US, there is a lack of talent or not enough engineers to supply the demand of software engineers in the companies. So for that, so you're limited to that number. And from what I know in the last couple of years, we've been basically exceeding that quota, as in a lot of the companies, you could imagine how big Google is, Microsoft, Apple, they're all looking for engineers. They want to hire more people, but they're not able to actually get the H-1Bs. From what I know in the last year, I think they basically, on the date, so there's like a whole calendar. If you're really looking for a job, you should really look at the dates, because basically on, I believe, April 1st of every year is when they start accepting H-1B applications for all the different companies. And then it takes about a month for the government to pretty much approve them.
To clarify, the company applies, you don't apply.
Yeah.
Yeah, the company applies for a certain amount of H-1Bs.
Yeah, so you would pretty much want to do the interviewing process with the company months in advance of that, because they want to have that application ready for you. And you would have to accept that. You probably want to basically need 1 month for the company to do all the paperwork. So you're talking about March 1st now. And then you probably have to go through the whole interview process and accept the offer, and that could be 1 month to 3 months. So you're looking at the end of the year from the previous year. But from what I know from the last year, I think like on April 1st, pretty much all the H-1B applications were pretty much full, meaning there were more than 80,000 applications. And basically after that, when that happens, all of the applications of, I don't know, 100,000 or more goes into a lottery. And they just randomly choose who will actually get the visas. So this is not specifically for Latin America, but this is just generally for anyone outside of the US or foreign nationals. From what I do know, though, I think there are also other visas that you can get. I think Chile, I've been on vacation for the last half year, so it could be a little rusty. But I think there are a couple countries that includes Chile, Australians, and I think Singaporeans that have an exception to this quota, where they have a separate visa to work in the US.
One more thing another thing is that a lot of companies are opening offices abroad because the H-1B process is such a pain. So I know a company personally, my friend works at, that has 2 offices in Mexico, for example. So that's often a good way to build skills. So you work with a company that's like, based in Silicon Valley, so you have all the connections, you meet people, you get that knowledge, and then you can use that to sort of boost your chances of finding a company that can sponsor you for a visa. Yeah. Did that make sense?
I think that you go there and you go to the connection, the network connection, you go there, that's what you said, going to
It's no guarantee, but the more people you know, the more likely you are to find a job that may have a spot open for you, have an H-1B open. Yeah.
So on that point too, is that if you're actually working for like the bigger companies that do have other offices in other countries, so for example, like Google, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, if you actually work for them for like a year, I think, there's also another visa that you could actually use. There's another, I think it's L1, I don't know, where they're able to sponsor you because you already worked for the company, even though you're not in the US, you might be working from Mexico, from Lima, from wherever. Then they can still sponsor you to work in the US potentially in the following year on a different visa, not on the H-1B, which would be easier for them to actually get. There's
We can talk more about the visas and stuff later. It's really horrible. Maybe. Yeah. Yes.
If you raise attention to your cross information with other recruiters, like relate communication skills, because it maybe was one guy have a lot of skills or tech skills, but not maybe communication skills or soft skills. So you guys cross information with other people in the company.
Yeah, so the question was, if someone has a good technical skills, but maybe not as good at communication skills, do those sort of differences get communicated through the different people you interviewed with? Is that right?
Or maybe in another area.
Yeah.